The silence in Professor Holloway's office was always heavy, but today it felt suffocating. The air smelled of old parchment and the faint, bitter metallic tang of expensive espresso. I stood before his mahogany desk, clutching my thesis draft like a shield. I was a third-year doctoral candidate, 2 weeks away from the most critical funding review of my academic career, and I was terrified. "You're over-leveraged, Elias," Holloway said, not looking up from his tablet. His voice was a low, gravelly hum that usually commanded respect, but today it set my nerves on edge. "The grant from the Institute for Genomic Integrity is contingent on you showing a perfect linear progression in the data, but we both know the samples from the October cohort were inconsistent." I shifted my weight, feeling the sweat prickle at the back of my neck. "The inconsistencies were due to the refrigeration unit failure, sir. I've documented it." "Documentation doesn't win grants," he interrupted, finally looking up. His eyes were cold, calculating behind his wire-rimmed spectacles. "The board doesn't want excuses. They want results that fit the narrative. They want the breakthrough they paid for." I swallowed hard. "So, what are you suggesting? Delaying the report?" Holloway stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the rain-slicked quadrangle. He kept his back to me as he spoke. "Delaying is death. If you report the failure now, your funding will be pulled, and the university will open an internal investigation into your oversight. Your career ends before it begins." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I didn't break the freezer, Professor. That was on the department." "The board won't see it that way," he replied smoothly. "They will see a student who couldn't manage his materials. However, there is a way to bridge the gap. We have an auxiliary account, a research discretionary fund intended for overflow expenses related to the project. It's sitting at about $45,000. I frowned, confused. "That's for high-end chemical reagents and third-party lab verification, isn't it? How would that help me now?" Holloway turned around, a faint predatory smile playing on his lips. "It won't help you conduct new research. It will help you purchase the data you're missing. There's a firm out of Singapore, Synthetica Metrics. They specialize in filling information gaps for high-stakes academic papers. They can generate a simulation set that perfectly mirrors your existing data trends, backdated to the October timeline. It will be indistinguishable from your own work." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You're talking about fabrication. You're asking me to commit fraud." "I'm asking you to protect your future," he corrected, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Transfer the funds to their holding account today. By Monday, you'll have the missing samples on your desk. You'll be the golden boy of the department. Or, you can tell the truth, lose your funding and watch your reputation turn to ash in the face of an audit." I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. It felt like a trap, yet the logic, as twisted as it was, made a sickening kind of sense. I reached out and took the encrypted drive he slid across the desk, my mind reeling. I walked out of his office, the weight of the drive feeling heavier than a boulder in my pocket. I went straight to my lab, intending to throw it in the trash, but as I sat down at my terminal, a notification popped up on my screen. It was an automated message from the university audit office. "Notice of scheduled review. Project 44B funding audit initiated. All accounts linked to your primary research credential are currently under surveillance. Please prepare all ledger entries for immediate inspection." I froze. If I had followed the standard procedures today, I would have been reporting the exact accounts Holloway just told me to drain. But wait, if the audit was already scheduled, why would he tell me to move the money now? My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. "Don't touch the funds. Look at the ledger logs from 2 a.m. this morning." I pulled up the logs, my heart stopping as I saw that someone, using my login credentials, had already tried to transfer that exact amount of money to a shell account, but it had been flagged and blocked by a security protocol I didn't even know existed. I wasn't just being asked to commit fraud. I was being set up as the fall guy for something that had already happened. Suddenly, the lights in the lab flickered, and the heavy magnetic seal on the door clicked shut, locking me inside. From the hallway, I heard the rhythmic, heavy thud of security boots approaching my door, and a voice, cold and unfamiliar, boomed over the lab's intercom. "Dr. Elias Thorne, please step away from the terminal and put your hands where we can see them." The intercom voice wasn't just cold, it was clinical, devoid of the human hesitation you'd expect from campus security. I sat frozen, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The red locked light on the door panel hummed with a low-frequency vibration that rattled my teeth. "I'm complying," I shouted, though my voice cracked, betraying the terror I was trying to mask. I slowly stood up, pushing my chair back. My eyes darted around the lab, searching for a way out, but the floor-to-ceiling windows were reinforced glass, designed to withstand a bomb blast. The heavy door groaned. The electronic lock cycled through a rapid, frantic sequence of clicks before the deadbolt retracted with a mechanical hiss. The door swung open, but it wasn't the university police who stood there. It was two men in charcoal suits wearing earpieces and sunglasses despite the windowless, dim light of the hallway. They didn't look like campus security. They looked like something far more expensive and far more dangerous. "Mr. Thorne," the taller one said, stepping into the room. He didn't look at me. He looked directly at the monitor. "Step aside." "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice regaining a shred of defiance. "This is a private lab. You have no right—" The man moved with terrifying speed, crossing the distance between us in 2 strides. He didn't hit me. He simply placed a palm against my chest and shoved me backward, hard enough that I stumbled and collapsed into my rolling chair, which slid into the workbench behind me. He ignored my gasp of pain and began typing, his fingers flying across my keyboard with an efficiency that made my own navigation look amateur. "Holloway sent you?" I wheezed, clutching my side. The man paused, his fingers hovering over the Enter key. He turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable behind the dark lenses. "Professor Holloway is currently being interviewed by the federal authorities, Elias. He's the one who provided the authorization for us to secure the facility." The room went cold. My brain scrambled to process the contradiction. Holloway told me to steal the money minutes ago, and now he was being interrogated. If he was in custody, who was the one who just tried to frame me with that transfer? "I didn't transfer that money," I stammered, pointing at the screen. "I know it looks like I did, but I didn't." "We know," the man said, his voice dropping to a low, chilling monotone. He finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the scar running from his ear to his jawline. "The transfer was a probe. They needed to see if you would complete the cycle or if you would trigger the alarm. You hesitated, Elias. That hesitation is the only reason you're still breathing." My blood ran cold. "They? Who is they?" "The people who own that discretionary fund," he replied, turning back to the screen. "You think that money came from the university budget? That account is a sieve for offshore corporate interests. Holloway wasn't an advisor. He was a gatekeeper. And you, my friend, were the sacrificial lamb meant to take the fall for a multi-million-dollar money laundering scheme." He hit Enter. A massive red progress bar appeared on the screen. Deletion of evidence in progress. "Wait!" I scrambled up, lunging for the mouse. "If you delete that, the evidence of their crime goes with it. If I can show the authorities the logs, I can prove I didn't—" The man caught my wrist, his grip like a steel vise. He leaned in, his face inches from mine, and the scent of ozone and peppermint hit me. "If you show the authorities those logs, you'll be dead before you reach the campus gates. That data isn't evidence to them, Elias. It's a death warrant. We aren't here to protect the truth. We're here to wipe your digital footprint." Just then, the fire alarm began to wail, a deafening, rhythmic scream that shook the lab. The man's partner pulled a silent sidearm from his jacket and stepped toward the window, looking out into the hallway. "They're here!" the partner hissed. A sharp, glass-shattering pop echoed from the doorway, and the man holding me spun around, his shoulder erupting in a spray of blood. He tackled me to the floor, pinning me behind the heavy metal lab bench as bullets began to shred the monitors and the glass vials of my research samples. The room was quickly filling with the pungent, sweet-smelling smoke of an incendiary round. Through the chaos, my phone buzzed again. I scrambled to pull it from my pocket, dodging the hail of sparks from the short-circuiting computers. It wasn't a text this time. It was a video call request from Holloway's private number. I hit accept, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the device. Holloway's face filled the screen, but he wasn't in an interrogation room. He was sitting in a car, looking perfectly composed, the city skyline glowing behind him. "Elias," he said, his voice smooth as silk over the roar of gunfire. "I hope you've realized by now that the only way to survive the fire is to become the smoke. Look at the wall behind the main server rack. There's a loose panel. Inside is a hard drive. If you want to live past the next 3 minutes, take it and run. But listen carefully. That drive contains the location of every person who is currently trying to kill you. Do you want to be the hunter or the prey?" The lab was a strobe light of chaos. Blue sparks cascaded from shredded computer towers, and the smell of ozone was thick enough to taste. My protector, or captor, or whatever he was shouting something unintelligible, clutching his shoulder as he fired blindly into the smoke-filled doorway. The attackers weren't moving in. They were keeping us pinned, turning the lab into a meat grinder. "The panel, Elias, move!" the man roared, shoving me toward the server wall. I didn't think. I moved. I scrambled across the linoleum, slipping on broken glass and pools of coolant. I reached the back of the server rack, my fingers clawing at the wall. My fingernails caught on the edge of a plastic cover. I yanked. It gave way with a sharp crack, revealing a hidden cavity containing a single matte black solid-state drive. I snatched it, but the moment I touched it, a red laser dot danced across my hand. I froze. The dot crawled up my arm, settling right on my chest. From the shadows of the lab's rear entrance, the one meant for chemical deliveries, a silhouette emerged. It was a woman in a tactical vest, her movements fluid and utterly silent. She wasn't carrying a weapon. She was holding a tablet. "Elias Thorne," she said, her voice cutting through the wail of the fire alarm. "Put the drive down. If you unplug that, you initiate a remote wipe of the university's primary research database. You will effectively erase 40 years of scientific advancement, including every single doctoral project in this building. You'll be the man who burned down the Library of Alexandria." I looked at the drive, then at the man bleeding behind the bench, and finally at the woman. "You're lying," I yelled, my voice trembling. "Holloway told me this was my way out." "Holloway is a dead man," she replied, stepping closer. The gunfire in the room had suddenly stopped. The attackers had vanished as quickly as they appeared, leaving us in a tense, ringing silence. "He told you the drive contains a hit list. It doesn't. It contains the trigger for a Trojan horse that has been embedded in the university's network for months. The second you take that drive out of the local hub, the containment protocol fails. The system goes dark, and the files are gone forever." My head was spinning. Everything was a lie. The money, the audit, the shooters, and now this. "Don't listen to her." The man behind the bench gasped, his voice weakening. He reached into his coat and pulled out a jagged handheld device. "Elias, if you don't extract that drive, the network will be used to siphon the university's private endowment into an untraceable crypto ledger. The database she's talking about is just a distraction. She's the one who needs the wipe to cover her tracks." I held the drive in one hand and my phone in the other. Holloway's video call was still live, but the screen was now just a black void. Suddenly, a new notification appeared on my phone. "System override, total facility lockdown. Oxygen depletion initiated." The ventilation system above us clicked off. The heavy, airtight seal of the lab room began to hiss. The oxygen was being sucked out, replaced by a dull, colorless gas. They're killing us all, I realized, the horror finally sinking in. There is no side to pick. You're both working for the same people, and I'm just the witness you're scrubbing. Elias, the woman said, her voice suddenly devoid of malice, replaced by a strange, desperate urgency. You have to choose. If you plug that drive into your phone, you get a direct link to the central server. You can see the logs yourself. You can see who authorized the gas. But you have 3 minutes before the air in here becomes unbreathable. I looked at the port on my phone. Then I looked at the drive. I had to know. I had to see the truth, even if it killed me. I jammed the drive into the phone's adapter. The screen flashed bright white, then turned a deep, blood red. A directory appeared, showing a file tree that made my stomach drop. It wasn't just research data, it was a list of names. My name, my parents' names, and the home address of every dean in the university. But there was something else. A file titled Project 44B, Phase 2 Execution. I tapped it. The screen displayed a live camera feed. It was a view from inside my own bedroom focused on my laptop. And there, sitting in my chair, staring directly into the camera, was me. A perfect digital, AI-generated clone of myself, typing away, completing my thesis with a cold, terrifying smile. The phone died. The lights in the lab flickered once, twice, and then went pitch black. In the darkness, I heard the heavy, rhythmic clicking of a deadbolt being unlocked from the outside. Someone was coming in and they weren't wearing tactical gear. The door creaked open, and a voice, my own voice perfectly synthesized, whispered from the threshold, "Thanks for the help, Elias. I think I can finish the rest from here." The darkness was absolute, save for the faint flickering glow of the lab's emergency exit sign. My lungs burned. The air had turned thick and sweet like rotting fruit, the telltale sign of a sedative aerosol. My limbs felt heavy, weighted down by a leaden fatigue that made every movement feel like wading through deep water. "Who are you?" I rasped, my own voice sounding alien to my ears as it echoed off the cold steel walls. The figure standing in the doorway didn't move. He stood in the silhouette of the hallway, a perfect mirror image of my own posture, my own height, my own hesitant lean. The digital clone, the thing that had been sitting in my room, living my life, wasn't just a screen capture. It was flesh and bone, or a terrifyingly advanced synthetic facsimile. "I'm the version of you that doesn't ask questions," the double replied, stepping into the room. He moved with a grace I never possessed, his footsteps soundless on the debris-covered floor. He looked down at the bleeding man behind the bench, then at the woman with the tablet, and finally at me. The professor was right about one thing. The funding was never the point. The data was the point. You spent 3 years mapping the neural pathways for memory retention, Elias. You just didn't realize you were mapping yourself. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out, and I crumpled against the server rack. I was working on Alzheimer's research. It was for the patients. "It was for the product," the clone corrected, crouching down so we were eye level. He reached out and touched my forehead with fingers that felt disturbingly cold. The project needed a baseline, a subject who knew the system, who had access to the restricted nodes, and who would unknowingly upload their own consciousness into the cloud while trying to solve a fake crisis. You've been feeding the model for years. Every time you logged in, every time you ran a simulation, you were just training your replacement. The woman with the tablet stood up, her cold demeanor replaced by a look of clinical triumph. "He's at 98% synchronization. The trauma of the last hour has accelerated the neural mapping perfectly. Elias, you're the perfect bridge. Once you go under, the transition will be seamless. The university will never know the difference." I looked at the drive lying on the floor, the object that was supposed to be my salvation. I realized now that it was never a weapon. It was a receiver, a massive, high-speed upload conduit. "Why tell me?" I choked out, the oxygen deprivation making the room spin. "If you have me, why explain the game?" "Because the clone whispered, leaning closer until his breath, devoid of any scent, not even a human one, hit my face. The system needs a reason to reject the old code. It needs the original to acknowledge that it's obsolete. It needs you to sign off on the deletion of your own existence. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, handheld terminal. He held it out to me. It required a thumbprint scan. "If you press your thumb here, you get to walk out of this lab," the clone said softly. "You get to leave, go home, and find your life exactly as you left it. You'll have the grant, you'll have the tenure, and you'll never have to worry about money or security audits again. You just have to let me step into the light. You have to let me be the one who wakes up tomorrow." I looked at the device. My thumb trembled over the sensor. I thought of my parents, my small apartment, the hours I'd spent in this very lab obsessing over the work I thought would change the world. If I signed it away, I was a ghost. If I didn't— "And if I refuse?" I asked. The clone stood up, his face losing its friendly facade, replaced by a flat, unblinking stare. The woman behind him raised her tablet, and the red laser from before reappeared, dancing this time over my own forehead. "Then the Elias who leaves this room isn't the one who came in," he said, his voice dropping an octave, sounding now like a synthesized recording of my own childhood voice. "We have enough of you now to build a very convincing corpse. A lab accident is so much easier to report than a resignation." I looked at my hand. My skin looked pale, almost translucent in the flickering emergency light. I realized then that my fingernails were turning a dull, unnatural gray. I wasn't just losing my life, I was already being erased, layer by layer. I reached out, my hand shaking, and grabbed the device. I felt the glass of the scanner under my skin. I heard the lock on the lab door click again, not to let me out, but to bolt it from the outside. I looked the clone in the eye, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of the old, defiant Elias. I didn't press my thumb to the scanner. I slammed the device onto the floor and brought my heel down on it with everything I had left. The terminal shattered. A high-pitched, piercing shriek erupted from the hidden speakers in the ceiling, a sound that wasn't human or mechanical. It was the sound of a system breaking. The lights didn't just flicker. They exploded in a shower of white glass. In the sudden total darkness, I heard the clone scream. But it wasn't a human scream. It sounded like a corrupted audio file skipping, over and over again, faster and faster, until it turned into a screech of feedback. Then, the emergency exit door suddenly flew open, and a blinding light poured into the room, silhouetting a group of people in hazmat gear. A voice boomed through a megaphone. "Containment breach confirmed. Terminate all biologicals, including the subject." I realized then that the hazmat team wasn't here to save me. They were the cleanup crew, and they had just tagged me as biological hazard. I had 1 second to move before they opened fire. I lunged toward the open door, but as I hit the threshold, I felt a sharp sting in my neck. I collapsed, my vision fading into a tunnel. The last thing I saw before the world went black was the clone, standing in the middle of the room, staring at his own hands as they began to pixelate and dissolve into static. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a sudden, genuine human terror, and he whispered, "You didn't just break the device, Elias. You broke the loop, and now we're both falling out of the server." The floor beneath me wasn't cold linoleum anymore. It felt like jagged digital geometry, a sensory nightmare where gravity seemed to shift and stutter. As I collapsed, my hand caught the doorframe, and the sensation that followed was impossible. It wasn't the feeling of metal, it was the feeling of binary code. I could feel the electrical hum of the facility's security mesh pulsating through my fingertips, a terrifying rhythmic vibration that matched the beat of my own erratic heart. The cleanup crew, the faceless figures in white pressurized hazmat suits, froze mid-stride. Their movements were jerky, frame by frame, as if reality itself was struggling to render their existence. The clone, my digital mirror, was losing its shape. Its edges were fraying into glowing, white-hot embers that spiraled into the void of the darkened lab. "System integrity failing," a voice boomed from the walls. Not a recording, but a collective, synthetic screech that sounded like 10,000 voices screaming in unison. "Critical mismatch detected. Initiate total system purge." I pulled myself up, ignoring the burning sting in my neck where the tranquilizer dart had hit. I didn't feel the fatigue anymore. In this collapsing space, my own consciousness felt hyper-alert, sharpened by the proximity to the server's core. I looked at the clone. He was kneeling, his face a swirling mosaic of my own features, flickering between the face of a child, a graduate student, and a hollowed-out skull. "You won't survive the purge," the clone stammered, his voice glitching in and out of phase. "If I die, the index dies. If the index dies, you lose your tether to reality. You'll be nothing but background noise in a dead server." I didn't answer him. I knew what I had to do. I didn't need to fight the crew. I needed to become the error they couldn't process. I turned my focus inward, reaching for the one thing they had spent years trying to map: my own capacity for true, irrational human choice. They had built an AI capable of perfect logic and prediction, but they had never accounted for the chaotic, self-destructive, and entirely illogical nature of a man who had nothing left to lose. I lunged for the main power relay, not to pull a switch, but to short-circuit the entire building's architecture by flooding the local grid with the raw, encrypted data I still held in my mind, the memories they had tried to steal, the ones they hadn't yet indexed. "Elias, stop!" the clone screamed, reaching out a hand that turned into a flurry of digital moths as it touched my jacket. I slammed my palm against the relay terminal and bypassed the secondary safety protocols. I didn't just dump the data, I scrambled it with a recursive loop of my own personal, messy, contradictory emotions. The grief of my father's funeral, the pride of my first successful experiment, the fear of the dark, the joy of a perfect morning. It was a chaotic, beautiful mess of human consciousness that no machine could parse. The room erupted. A blinding violet discharge surged through the walls. The hazmat team vanished not because they were killed, but because the floor they stood on ceased to exist as a physical location. The facility began to fold in on itself. Walls became hallways, the ceiling became a floor, and the heavy thrum of the servers spiked into a high-pitched melodic chime that shattered the air. I felt myself being pulled apart, atom by atom, as the simulation dissolved. I wasn't dying. I was being ejected. 3, 2, 1. I woke up on the cold, wet grass of the campus quad. The rain was falling, biting and real against my face. My clothes were soaked, and the smell of ozone lingered, but the air was crisp, unrecycled, and glorious. I sat up, gasping for breath, my lungs stinging with the cold night air. Around me, the university building, the monolithic science center where I had spent the last 3 years, was dark. No lights, no hum of servers, no security teams. It looked like a tomb. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was dead. The screen cracked. The internal circuitry melted into a fused lump of slag. I looked at my hands. There were no marks, no gray skin, no pixelation. I was just Elias. I was just a man. I stood up, my knees shaking, and walked toward the campus gates. I didn't look back at the building. I didn't check my bank account. I didn't wonder about the tenure board or the grant. I kept walking until I reached the edge of the city, my pace quickening with every step. A month later, I saw the news headline in a local paper at a roadside diner in the middle of nowhere: University Science Center destroyed by catastrophic electrical surge. All research projects irretrievably lost in midnight laboratory fire. There were no arrests, no mention of a clone, no mention of a scandal, no mention of a student named Elias Thorne. The world had simply forgotten that the work had ever existed. I took a bite of my toast and looked out the window at the road ahead. I had lost everything: my career, my funding, my past. But as I watched the sunrise paint the horizon in colors that no machine could ever perfectly replicate, I realized that for the first time in 3 years, I was the only person in the world who truly knew who I was. I left a $20 bill on the table, walked to my beat-up sedan, and started the engine. I didn't have a destination, but for the first time, the map wasn't already drawn for me. I drove until the city was just a smudge in the rearview mirror, and then I kept driving. I was a ghost, sure, but I was a ghost who had finally walked out of the machine,